Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a short story from the incredible mind of David Morningway, author of The Mountain. And as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled Perception. Let's get straight into that. Only chaos and danger await outside the forests. Nightmare creatures and other beings of sinister design and nature dwell among life forms in dark landscapes as alien to us as we are to them. Over and over the elders' warnings kept repeating within Faustus' young mind. Every child and adolescent knew the warnings, and were usually told weekly, if not daily, of the ominous and frenetically savage world outside of the forests. However, out of all the mysteriously terrifying tales and ancient legends, there was not one actual first-hand account or factual shred of proof. They remained just that, tales and legends. All anyone could ever say for certain was hearing strange alien noises, with the occasional flash of unfamiliar light. In fact, no one had even made it far enough past the forest edge to ever find out. And Faustus was slightly small for his young age, but never quite as big or strong as the other boys. Luckily, he was able to balance it out by being the fastest and being capable to last the longest in any cardio-based endeavour. Still, he longed to be accepted by the other lads as their equal, as a man, even though he was barely a teenager himself. This foolish strife had led Faustus halfway to the edge of the forest, in the middle of the night. The closer he approached, the quicker his boyish pride seemed to want to trade in on this bad investment of popularity, and cut even swiftly, retreating home. He hadn't told anyone of this late-night adventure anyhow. Plus, if his parents found out he wasn't actually sleeping at home, they would ground him until next spring. No, he had nothing to lose by going home now. Faustus closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, before opening his eyes and exhaling slowly. I can do this, he thought. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. There's nothing to fear past the forest's edge. It's just more forest and fields, that's all, he said, convincing himself that the elders just tell these stories to keep children from wandering off and getting lost or picked off by predators. No more than 15 minutes had gone by before he suddenly stopped his steady pace, and before him, not 30 paces away, stood the forest edge, towering like an unknown gargantuan entity composed of pure shadow. As he approached, though, he found himself feeling silly for being so scared, for there was no grand alien landscape, no ghouls or unknown entities. It was just a field with more trees on the other end. Nothing more. Faustus figured he could cross the clearing, walk around for a bit, and then he'd head home and challenge the older boys to cross tomorrow, knowing that they would be too frightened, thus securing his manhood and his station within the community. He could even make it home soon enough to get a decent night's sleep still. I'm doing this, Faustus accidentally exclaimed aloud, before crouching low on a defense next to a large pine tree, to see if any imaginary monsters or real predators had hurt him. He quickly straightened up, confidence once again taking over, and walked with purpose across the grass clearing ahead. The woods across the clearing at first seemed as typical as any other part of the forest, and with grass, trees, leaves, would all appearing normal. However, that thought quickly began to vanish into confusion and panic, making his heart's pace slowly start to rise into a warm, chaotic rhythm. Like water slowly reaching boil, a great monolithic structure became visible, along with the ending of the forest and the world as he knew it. It took every ounce of his willpower and courage to control the fight or flight responses screaming into Faustus' mind and nervous system, making his heart pound hard and erratic within him, like thunder was trying to break free from the clouds. He took a few controlled deep breaths, pushing the storm of his fearful emotions back down, somewhat steadying himself, and moved forward. And with every step he took, the world became less familiar and increasingly more horrifying. He could see in more frightening detail the strange symmetric triangular monoliths, which became more imminent with every passing second, and 4 stepped forward. The foreign structures seemed to dot the strange new landscape before him, stretching up so high into the night sky they seemed to be reaching for the stars themselves. And with his final steps out of the tree line, he stopped, frozen in the realization that almost everything he could now perceive with his senses was both wholly unfamiliar and extremely unnerving. It seemed that at one time, perhaps, this new and strange world might not have been very different, inherently, from his own, although minimally, for he could identify certain plants and trees that existed in his world as well. Although unlike the forest, this foliage seemed scattered, or with no logical purpose, at least Faustus could not presently fathom. Unfortunately, Faustus could not be able to process this long enough to establish an answer or logical theory. In fact, he would not even have time to process another coherent thought for the rest of his odyssey into this forbidden and increasingly disturbing place. For a shift had now occurred. A creeping dread that threatened to close his windpipe and crush his chest, as if the air pressure itself had increased and was screaming at his instincts that something was so very wrong. After a few unbearably long and silent moments, Faustus resumed his careful pace, but was stopped short by a silent and still river of the most peculiar nature. At least, his mind first told him that it was inherently aquatic, for its size and shape matched that of a large and prominent river, and with a flattened symmetry of a greyish coloration. Oddly enough, when he approached this new sight, he noticed that it was just as still and silent as the rest of the atmosphere around him had become. It appeared perfectly smoothed out, as water does rock in a perpetual flowing current, but also somehow rough and gritty to the immediate touch. The feeling of unparalleled dread Faustus had felt upon arriving in this mysterious place had not yet faded. He had hoped that it was just the shock of seeing a whole new and frightening world, and that the feeling would soon transition into awe and wonder. However, this shift in his surroundings, this sudden and nerve-crushing fear, had to be instincts, for living his entire life in the forest had strengthened these instincts into a finely tuned instrument for detecting danger, strung into his very nervous system, and knowing when these chords were being stroked had become second nature to him. I had never sung to him falsely. And as he crossed the oddly still river, this instinctual song of warning hit its crescendo upon putting his feet back on the grass, and his eyes now on 2 golden orbs hovering below the tall thorn bushes at the base of the closest monolithic structure. At first, Faustus thought logically. His brain snapped firing at light speed, trying to formulate any rationalization as to what visibly loomed before him. Lightning bugs. They're just doing their very normal, very common mating dance, thought Faustus logically. Yes, that's it, he thought, calming himself a bit. Well, it's not uncommon at the end of mating season to see loose stragglers, such as these, hover near each other, instead of a mass orgy of chaotic light constructed by these angelic-looking insects at the season's peak. And as this more reasonable thought took root in his mind, he inhaled slowly and deeply, and went to exhale in the same manner, but the air caught in his throat sharply, almost gagging himself as 2 yellow orbs blinked. Not gently faded out independently, as lightning bugs do, but simultaneously and instantly blinked out of existence, only to return twice as fast and with twice their intensity, like 2 vast stars being snuffed out, only to swiftly return with a violent and beautiful rebirth of a phoenix. Moonlight shimmered across the yellow orbs as hot panic thrust itself through Faustus' brain, sent an intense burst of adrenaline and near-crippling fear shoot down his spine, until it hit his stomach, making a brief gurgle of the acids within, upon the unforgiving stark realization that these 2 orbs were not sentient, but part of a sentience. Unfortunately, he had less than a second to process this before the eyes and their master quickly took a few short and quick paces forward, before abruptly stopping, both compacting itself to the ground while keeping its head raised high, preparing its body for an obvious leap attack. Its body! Oh God! Its body, thought Phoiostus, freezing up at the sight. It was beyond black, seeming to be composed of pure shadow, and drawing in all surrounding ambient light like a black hole, making the immediate threat seem almost rather ethereal than physical. Nevertheless, the gravity of how very real this threat was came crashing down on him like an avalanche of horrifying truth, as enormous white teeth began emerging from the vaunted black. Ivory fanged daggers of the most imposing predatorial beast revealed themselves to him, contrasting hard within the dark void of the creature. Phoiostus needed more encouragement, and with a quick twist and powerful thrust, he was running in the opposite direction, and the chase was on. Now he had barely made it a dozen paces, circling around the small tree, when he felt an electric hot shock slice through his backside. And though initially painful, it seemed to be just a graze, for he lost no motor skills and even brought himself a full second, whilst the creature's claws were temporarily stuck in the tree. Rather the adrenaline is masking the severity of the injury, thought Phoiostus, or I barely just evaded a critical wound. Either instance was deemed irrelevant, for in this moment all that mattered was how to survive, to run. And taking advantage of his brief window of luck, while the shadow demon's claws were caught in the tree, Phoiostus veered upwards and to the left with a motivated haste, sprinting through a large patch of thorn-covered ivy, and subsequently cutting himself with dozens of small lacerations in the process, but ultimately denying the beast a direct path to him, for the shadow creature was clearly too large to fit inside, let alone navigate through the thorns and ivy. And as he watched the monster carefully slither back out, he breathed out a sigh of relief at his temporary reprieve from death. Then, just to have his panic return with vengeance, for as the shadow demon deemed the course impassable, it began quickly traversing around the thicket, where it was hollow and exposed at the other end, where Phoiostus now stood. 5 seconds, perhaps, thought Phoiostus, until he was found. And so, without hesitation to have or a second to spare, he began the count. 5 seconds, he internally said, as Phoiostus erupted out of the foliage and onto the base of the closest monolith. Now, facing the alien structure, he could make out through the moonlight that strange structure was actually a dull red in most places, and with the bottom part of the side closest to him seeming to be made of some kind of white rock material from the best of his understanding. 4 seconds. He reminded himself as panic began to bloom like a black lily within his heart, making it beat hard and almost painful. He began to blindly run before the shadow beast could pin and corner him against the wall of the monolith, but stopped suddenly as he noticed a slight horizontal opening at the very bottom of the structure, almost like a crack in the structure, but perfectly symmetric. 3 seconds, he thought, peering inside the dark aperture, as he heard the stealthy and tenacious footfalls of death steadily approaching behind him, along with the sound of frantic, excited breathing, no doubt anticipating the meal and thrill of the kill. 2 seconds. As young Phoiostus moved his legs as fast as he could, and the blood could pump into them, throwing himself into an unknown abyss of eldritch origin and probable maleficent intent. 1 second. He yelled out audibly this time, as the wall he squeezed through minorly shook from the impact, as one dark appendage grasped feverishly for him, but to no avail. Thank goodness, thought Phoiostus, feeling a bit of hope return. It could not fit. Phoiostus now wondered if the strange cave-like entrance was in fact composed of rock as he initially thought, for it shuddered ever so slightly each time the shadow beast attempted grabbing him, thought Phoiostus in terror. Is the monster truly that strong? Strong enough to make rocks shake? Thankfully, after just a few moments, the beast had seemingly given up, retracting its arm and vanishing back into the night. Phoiostus now trapped within an alien structure, in a land his elders called a nightmare, or even hell, with his only known portal of escape guarded by his relentless pursuer. Obviously, there were only 2 options: try running home and probably be eaten, or if not worse, or head further down the rabbit hole. He glanced around nervously before his eyes met the faintest bit of light. On the opposing side of the dark room, he saw flat lines of dim light, which presented themselves in the shape of an uppercase letter L, an almost perfect right angle, and with a vertical line of illumination appearing longer than the bottom portion. And as he cautiously inched his way towards the light, he began hearing an amalgamation of unorthodox noises, which accosted his ears, in the same manner that the all-disturbing sights he beheld had accosted his eyes. Approaching the threshold, Faustus noticed that the smaller horizontal crevasse at the bottom was just big enough for him to squeeze through. And as he anxiously pressed his body through the illuminated slit of light, the strange and unfamiliar sounds escalated in volume, along with his panic. He soon crossed over into a long corridor, which seemed to have its own sun that floated high above Faustus, and glowed an unnatural colour that made the atmosphere seem cold and empty. The ground in which he now stood felt both hard and smooth to the touch, much like the river stones, only with slightly raised symmetric square indentations which were about 5 times longer than Faustus's entire body. After traversing another short distance, he spotted an opening to his left that appeared to be the source of the odd noises. The chamber was dark, and with bizarre, erratic lights issuing from somewhere within. And since Faustus could not identify the light's origin, he deemed it unwise to enter, and to instead just simply keep moving, one foot in front of the other, as he had done since his first step into this otherworldly journey into the unknown. Every chamber and corridor he trekked through became increasingly disturbing and frightening to his senses, until he eventually found himself standing inside a considerably larger room, with multiple suns adorned atop its high sky, and structures he had never seen in the forest before, sights that until this very day remained only notional, not even existing in the most insane of dreams. Nevertheless, his mind began forming similarity to some of the objects found within the colossal room, for in his humble forest community, families would fashion rudimentary platforms for eating food, and smaller seats of straw or wood to sometimes sit more comfortably as one ate. And although the objects were vaguely similar, they were crafted with more elaborate expertise than he thought was even possible, with one more alarming detail that overshadowed everything else in horrific truth. They were absolutely massive. Nothing short of a giant would adorn itself into those structures, with other peculiar attachments to them that made Faustus wonder about their physiology compared to his own.
Heta Ojimda.
A voice louder than thunder echoed through the great halls of the ancient esoteric structure, as if a sentient storm had called out to Faustus in a foreign tongue.
Ua Dira Ojimda.
The beastly baritone voice cried out again before a loud reverberating crash rang out, sounding as if 2 trees were smashed together hard, but with purpose, and with a curious metallic clinking that was briefly audible right after the crash of wood. Faustus's nerves threatened to freeze him in place as he reluctantly forced himself to peek around the corner into the next corridor, steeling himself to deal with whatever awaited him beyond. Faustus assumed that after experiencing so many horrifying and unearthly sights, that whatever lay beyond this precipice of madness, he would be somewhat ready for, and he was wrong. Albeit, Faustus was logically expecting something extremely large, according to the overwhelming volume of its words, which Faustus quite literally felt rumble in his chest every time the vehement foreign voice called out. Every ounce of courage and willpower left the young boy, freezing him in place as he glanced around the corner. The behemoth size was the first attribute he visually took in of the titanic being, easily being over 3,000 to 4,000 times larger than Faustus himself, with his own sun adorned upon its unnaturally large head. The sun aloft the Titan's head, however, shined meagerly, if at all, in comparison to the bright yet algid solar lights that graced the upper chambers, in which Faustus was an unwilling yet amazed witness of. Furthermore, Faustus beheld 2 immensely vast eyes that held irises glowing so blue that it appeared as if water flowed through them around the pupil. A second kind of fur or skin engulfed most of its gargantuan body, save for its face and the end of some extremities, which ran bare all the way down to its long, odd-looking claws, and with that part of the colossal beast being divergent and ghastly shade of white. Phoiostus followed the creature's physiology all the way to its feet, where he gasped in panic-induced fear, as he began to faintly tremble at the sinister sight before him. The demon, thought Phoiostus, trepidatiously, as the same shadow creature that frenetically chased him into the monolith within this hellscape weaved between the Titan's legs like a graceful serpent, before sitting next to him patiently, as if awaiting orders. And as the Titan stood directly under the nearest sun, it seemed to light up his own solar energy upon his head, making it shine like a glowing crown, or halo, thought Phoiostus, as this disquiet took on a whole new revelation. It was an angel, he thought, and the demon, in all veracity, was no demon at all, but simply a harbinger for its master, for the angel of death. And the shadow beast shifted itself into a still position, smelling the air, until it promptly jerked its head towards Phoiostus, apparently catching the young boy's scent within the still air of the chamber. No, thought Phoiostus, I want to live, he proclaimed to himself mentally, and prepared once again for the chase. And the dark monster began systematically checking the immediate area, meaning he did not actually see Phoiostus. Regardless, he knew it was only a small amount of time before he would be sniffed out, and knew that sprinting for the small threshold which ushered him into this place would be his only viable option for survival, and his only way out. He peeked his head out to spy on the shadow monster's advancement, marveling in horror at how the beast was so dark, and that it merely needed to be close to a shadow in order to disappear completely. And if not for its blazing yellow eyes, Phoiostus surely would have been eaten upon their first meeting. Perhaps, Phoiostus pondered, it poisons you with its fangs as to bring you back to the master. He wasn't certain of the Titan being an angel, or the shadow serpent being a demon. In fact, there was only one fact Phoiostus knew verily, and that was that he had no clue what was factually going on. Now, he said to himself internally, as Phoiostus began running with all of his might and will back the way he'd come, back down the rabbit hole to reverse this dreadful odyssey. The shadow demon was proving too fast though, tenaciously pursuing him until it almost reached within striking distance, forcing Phoiostus to abandon his desperate retreat and make a frantic detour, running under one of two large metal cube-like structures that were constructed within the specific disturbing room. Phoiostus dove under the closest cube-like structure, barely fitting and even more narrowly evading a pair of dark claws as the shadow monster attempted slithering under and after the young one, with only his reach being able to fit. Pinned against the far wall under this cube, Phoiostus watched the obsidian appendages try their hardest to hook him, each time the giant claws coming inches away from poor Phoiostus' face, as he flattened himself as much as possible against the far wall. Phoiostus closed his eyes, crying, waiting for the horrific fate that seemed more probable each second by a creature that should not even exist, in a world he did not even belong to. Phoiostus both heard and felt the cacophonous steps of the forthcoming Titan, and as the sounds hit their pinnacle, the shadow demon withdrew itself, and for one brief moment, the tumultuous world around Phoiostus was quiet and still, like the calm before a particularly nasty storm. And everything happened all at once. Instantaneously, Phoiostus' inefficient sanctuary was ripped away, leaving him exposed and ultimately vulnerable. He made a desperate yet hopeless attempt once again to flee and abscond his fate, just to find himself imprisoned inside the Titan's hand, catching Phoiostus early on in his brave yet futile escape. Phoiostus waited apprehensively for the crushing pressure of the Titan closing his massive hand. However, the colossal being swiftly began moving at an impossible speed, with Phoiostus still in the prison of his iron grip. And as the world between the Titan's fingers moved at light speed, Phoiostus saw blurry glimpses of otherworldly sights and sounds, and had to realistically wonder if the end of this trip was directly into the shadow demon's mouth. And the world slowed down for Phoiostus as the Titan stopped moving. All the lights visible before now were gone, replaced by only darkness, and by the near absence of sight almost completely. As Phoeustus waited to be fed to the shadow beast, the only sounds that could be heard were, "Wait," thought Phoeustus in recognition. It was the sounds of the forest. At the same time he realized this, at the same time he felt a rush of air and a mild thud as he impacted the ground. The Titan had relinquished him, and not only spared his life, but brought him to the forest's edge and away from the demon. Crying tears of unfathomable joy, Phoeustus wasted no time in running home, where he told his village of his wayward adventure, and confirmed everything they had ever feared, and more, about the world outside of their own. Phoeustus' bravery was never put into question again, not for all of his long and happy days.
Ojimda! Ojimda!
A voice yelled out into the night.
Ojimda!
The voice says again in a higher pitch. Ojimda! Ovine! The voice says, sounding even higher now. Oliver! Yells a young man into the night, with hair as blonde and bright as the sun, and irises in such a blue manner that it appeared as if the sky and the ocean once fought over the dominance of each other's colour, with neither one truly being the victor. The young man presided within his front doorway after closing the small gap in the white garage door he usually leaves open, and proceeded to call out his name into the night, almost sounding worried a bit. A black shadow swiftly darted within, making the man shut the door quickly so the black cat couldn't get back out, which made the door slam, and a loud sound reverberate throughout his house. And smiling down at the black cat traversing between his legs, he directed his gaze into the feline's deep, yellow eyes, as the cat sat looking up at him. And he spoke as he bent down to lovingly pet the cat's head. He said, contemplating as he scratched under the black cat's chin. It's funny, he began. To me you are absolutely the most adorable cute thing in the world, but I couldn't even begin to imagine that poor little mouse's perception. Wow. Another one. Wow. Short, but once again a chest-pounding adventure there from the incredible mind of David Morningway, exclusive to the DMT Forest Affair channel. Huge thank you, David, for penning this one, just as enthralling as the Mountain series, and a great switch on perception. Of course, I hope you enjoyed my rendition, and I look forward to more of your work in the future. Well, guys and girls as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. If you're an aspiring writer or would just like to have a crack at things like myself, then please do get in touch with me at the contact email, which is as on screen. contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope you all had a fantastic week at work or school, or perhaps you're studying, or maybe you're a long distance driver. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're enjoying it and are giving it your all. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.